Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Marked twice, loved once. Episode 3. Chapter 23. Alpha Leo's POV. Are you hurt? I asked Mother in a worried tone as I scanned her body. I'm fine. It's not me you should be worried about. She grumbled, her eyes fixed on the stairs. She will be fine, I assured Mother with a groan. Madison was not just an ordinary healer, he was the best. You should go and check on her, my wolf pleaded, but it fell on deaf ears. Maybe if she dies, I will be given a second chance, mate, I grumbled within me while my wolf howled angrily at my words. I heard footsteps coming from the stairs and moved my gaze towards them. Madison walked down the stairs with an expressionless look, making it difficult for me to detect his mood. How is she? Mother asked as she made her way to him. She is fine, he responded and got a quick hug from Mother before she hurriedly took the stairs. I watched him sit on the couch with a heavy sigh and go into deep thought for quite a while before speaking. I have already made a call. I'm tracing the buyer of the bullet, he said and got a nod from me. We both remained silent until I noticed his questioning gaze on me. What do you want to ask? I asked and saw a suspicious look on his face before he asked, why do you hate her so much? He questioned while I furrowed my eyebrows, acting confused. You know who I'm talking about. Your hatred for her could be seen in your eyes. He questioned while I scoffed and shook my head. We both remained silent before I responded, I don't know what you are talking about, and I believe you have better things to pay attention to. With those words, I stood to my feet and walked away. I knew how I reacted was terrible, but I knew I had to do it to avoid being interrogated by Madison. Madison was going through a lot, and I was glad he decided to spend his morning days here with us. As his best friend and cousin, I was supposed to comfort him, but my problems took the best of me. With a heavy sigh, I returned to the sitting room and saw him resting his head on the couch's headrest while his eyes were closed. Without being told, I knew he was thinking about his loss. Hey! I called, getting his attention. Let's check out some books at the library, I suggested, and saw him go silent for a moment before nodding. I sent for Lady Emma to open the library for us, which she did, and we both went in. Madison and I went over to the shelf of books, picked up the books of our choice, and sat on the couch. I opened the first page and tried reading, but I was interrupted by Mother coming in. Thank you, Madison. Mom thanked him as she made her way to us. I thought your abilities wouldn't work on her. She spoke in relief while I groaned and met the gaze of Madison, staring at me with a questioning look. He didn't respond to Mother's words, instead, he kept his watch on me, which was uncomfortable. She is staying for dinner. Mom announced, while I stared at her with furrowed eyebrows. No. I blurted out, she isn't joining us for dinner. It's a family dinner, and no outsiders are allowed. I spoke firmly while holding my mother's gaze. She was displeased by the way I reacted. She is not a stranger. Mother said firmly, she tried to save me today, not minding that she might have died. Only good friends and family would do that, she said while I released a disapproving groan from my lips. Don't tell me you are fat-phobic, Mother asked while I scoffed and held the gaze of Madison, who had been quiet since Mother came in. By the look on his face, it was obvious he was already getting irritated by my argument with my mother. What do you think your subjects will say of you if they get to know that you discriminate against plus-size people? She asked and didn't get a response from me. I'm having dinner with her, with or without you. With those words, she turned and left. With an angry groan, I ran my fingers through my hair and went into deep thought. I must ensure she leaves the mansion before things get out of hand. What are you hiding? Madison questioned, and I could not give him a response. I know you too well, Leo, you are not fat-phobic, there is something wrong, but it's your business. With those words, he stood to his feet and walked away, leaving me alone in the library. I frustratedly ran my fingers through my hair. Things would get complicated if Mother gets too close to her, and she decides to tell Mother about our secret. I left the library, returned to my room, and indulged myself with my work until a servant informed me that Vera was in the mansion. I left the room and met her downstairs, conversing with Mother. When she noticed my presence, she stood to her feet and flickered a warm smile, which I had no choice but to return. I got to where she stood and placed a peck on her lips, just to give Mother a good impression and no reason to suspect a thing. We were just talking about you, Mother spoke as I took my seat. About me? For what? I asked with raised eyebrows. We were wondering when you would pick the date for your wedding. I see no need in delaying. Nora's POV. I got up from the bed and walked around the room, feeling my once wounded stomach. I couldn't believe that a healer could heal and also wipe away any trace of the injury. As I was lost in thought, the door opened and he walked in with the same expressionless look. With that expression, one couldn't tell if he was mad, angry, sad, or happy. As he approached me, I lowered my head in respect, but he didn't respond, as usual. I heard you're joining us for dinner, he said harshly, more like he was unhappy. Yes, but I can leave if you want me to, I replied, holding his gaze. He furrowed his eyebrows in amusement at my words. You should be telling this to Alpha Leo. I have no business whether you leave or stay. His words confused me as I wondered what he meant. Why does he hate you? He asked me directly, making me gulp, not knowing what to say. I know Leo too well. I can read him like a book, so it's okay if you don't tell me. I'll sort it out myself, he added before turning to leave. I stopped him with my words. Why are you interested in this? I believe you have better things to do. I don't, he cut in. I don't have better things to do. He left, leaving me worried and confused. We should be happy, my wolf said, but I shook my head, something was not right, and I could feel it in my bones. A few minutes later, a maid informed me that dinner was served, and with panic, I went downstairs and saw everyone taking their seats, including Vera. We held each other's gaze, and she flashed me a fake welcoming smile, which I didn't respond to. I was tired of pretending. I heard you got shot, but good thing Lord Madison was here to help, she said to me. Then she turned to Lord Madison, who was seated at the other end of the table. Thank you for helping my sister. She thanked him with her usual charming smile, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned in Alpha Leo's direction and said, Your mate is beautiful, exactly the image of your dream mate. Alpha Leo looked at me briefly and nodded before saying, The moon goddess was gracious enough to grant my request. I scoffed within me and picked up my spoon. Tonight, I wouldn't let them cause me pain. Yes, and I'm lucky to have Alpha Leo as my mate, who is everyone's dream, Vera said and kissed his cheek while looking at me because I was seated right across from her. Now is the right time to tell everyone, my wolf suggested, but I kicked against it. And get rejected by him? I asked, getting a disapproving groan from her. We all ate in silence until Lord Madison spoke. I heard you two are twins, he said to Vera, who quickly responded, and best friends too. The lie came out so easily from her lips. Is that so? Lord Madison looked at me, wanting confirmation, but I didn't say a word. He moved his attention away from me and settled back on Vera. Today is not the first time I'm meeting your sister. He paused and caught my gaze while panic ran through my entire body. I feared he was going to tell everyone at the table that I got myself drunk and ended up in his room. Please don't, I spoke through telepathy, not knowing whether he heard it. She helped me a few days ago and, in appreciation, I want to give her a gift. But I don't know her favorite color or the things she likes. Since you're here, I believe you know what your sister and best friend like, he said, holding my gaze with an expressionless look. I wondered what this mysterious man was up to. Vera chuckled nervously and dropped her spoon on her plate. So you two have met? She asked with raised eyebrows, clearly surprised. Yes, he responded. Were you the one she spent the night with a few days ago? She questioned, causing me to choke on my food. It was clear she wanted to tarnish my image before Lord Madison and everyone else. She thought it was impossible for Lord Madison and me to have spent the night together, so she brought up the topic to give him the wrong impression of me. Everyone remained silent, including Lord Madison, who was chewing his food slowly with the same expressionless look on his face. He wasn't bothered by the question or interested. My apologies, it definitely wouldn't be you, Vera said, trying to brush it off. But he wasn't satisfied. You still haven't answered my question, he spoke with a demanding tone, and a hint of anger could be felt in his words. Oh, that. Vera responded nervously, tucking her hair behind her ears. Her favorite color is red, and she loves shoes and bags. I couldn't help but blurt out, no, I hate the color red, and shoes and bags are not my things. I'd prefer to be gifted a dozen books instead. Everyone gazed at me, and I realized what I had just done. I had exposed Vera as a liar, and it was evident that we weren't as close as she had made it seem. Lord Madison broke the silence. You're right, he said, holding his gaze on Vera. I was the man she spent the night with. I heard Lady Christabel gasp, and Alpha Leo's furious gaze was fixed on me. But unfortunately, we didn't do anything. She was so drunk and wasted, he added, holding my gaze. I was shocked by his words. Your sister was just sad that night and went out to drink. Don't make it look like she's a wayward girl, he spoke in a low tone, but it sounded like a warning. Apologies, everyone. I need to take my leave, he said, standing up and leaving while everyone remained silent. I wished the ground could swallow me up, but I also felt a glint of happiness. For the first time, a stranger had stood up for me, and it felt nice. Come on, let's eat, Lady Christabel urged, and we returned to our food. I avoided Alpha Leo's gaze, feeling his anger even from where I sat, and wondered why he was mad at me. After dinner, I thanked Lady Christabel and left the room. Walking out of the mansion, I saw Lord Madison coming through the gate, shirtless and wearing only jeans. He was sweating profusely, making him look incredibly hot, but I quickly looked away when I realized what I was doing. With a nervous gulp, I ignored him and walked past him, but he grabbed my wrist, stopping me in my tracks. Turning to hold his gaze, I met the same expressionless look on his face. What are you? He asked. Why do I feel the need to help and protect you, even when I don't want to? He asked as a forceful gulp went down my throat, but I quickly responded, because you are a good man with a good heart, I praised. For the first time, I saw a little smile crinkle on his left cheek, but he quickly wiped it away. You are good with words but certainly bad with actions, he said as he let go of my wrist. For the first time, I felt how cold the weather was. He held my gaze for a moment before turning to leave. What is he up to? Lolita asked, but I shrugged my shoulders and walked out of the gate. Arriving home, I went up to my room, took a quick bath, and sat at my reading table. I turned on my laptop and wrote a few chapters of my book before retiring to bed. With a relieved sigh, I closed my eyes, but I saw his face in my head. "Stop it," my wolf urged. I released a frustrated sigh and forced myself to sleep. The alarm on my phone woke me up from my sleep. With a grumble, I opened my eyes and tossed around my bed before standing up. I prayed, did my morning workout, and took a cold shower. After bathing, I got dressed in a pair of jeans, a white shirt, and a blue jacket. I tied my hair in a bun and applied light makeup to my face before staring at the mirror again. "You're doing great," my wolf encouraged, bringing a little smile to my face. "Let's face the world." I picked up my phone, laptop, and backpack and headed downstairs. At the table, I greeted Lively and saw the big frown on Dad's face. "So it's true?" Mother asked, and I furrowed my eyebrows at her words. "Since you can't get their attention, you decided to *E around." Mother cursed. "Excuse me," I said and got shunned by Vera. "Are you going to deny it?" Vera asked while I scoffed and shook my head. "It was definitely her doing." "What lies has she fed you this time?" I asked, feeling reluctant about what they would say. "Unfortunately, it's not Vera. An image from an anonymous source was published on your school's Instagram page. You were in the arms of a man being carried into a hotel. The face of the man was cropped out, but your face was visible," Father announced with disappointment in his voice. "What were you doing in a hotel with a man?" Father asked, disappointed, while I gulped and shook my head. I couldn't remember much, but I knew that the man was Lord Madison, but the source feared revealing his identity. "Believe me, Father, we did nothing. I was wasted, and he decided to help." "Nonsense!" Father yelled while hitting the dining table. "Why didn't he take you to his house or call a number on your phone? Why did it have to be a hotel?" Father yelled with rage while tears welled up in my eyes. I could take my mother's hate or my sister's hate, but I didn't think I could live if my father hated me too. "I'm truly disappointed in you," he yelled, stood up, and left. With a gulp, I let the tears flow down my cheeks. The disappointment on my father's face was something I couldn't bear. "It seems like my job has been taken away from me," Vera spoke with a chuckle while I wiped the tears off my face and left the table. As I stood outside the house, my wolf Lolita advised me not to go to school, but I couldn't. I had an important test, and I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. With a deep breath, I walked to school, and after a 15-minute walk, I arrived at the school gate. "You can do this," I encouraged myself, but as I walked through the gate, a voice spoke behind me. "Here comes Nora's POV." I willed myself to keep walking, ignoring the prying eyes and murmurs that followed me. My wolf howled for me to keep moving forward, to ignore the harsh words and whispers that surrounded me like a dense fog. I took a deep breath and kept walking, my eyes focused ahead, trying not to let the gossiping get to me. As I made my way to class, I saw my friend Dora waving at me with a worried look on her face. She always knew when something was wrong, and she was always there for me. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I walked over to her, ignoring the pointing fingers and murmurs that followed me. "Are you okay?" Dora asked, her voice full of concern. I nodded, trying to push the whispers to the back of my mind. "Have you seen what's circulating around the school's Instagram page?" she asked, and I nodded, my stomach sinking. I didn't want to talk about it, but I appreciated her concern. The whispers and murmurs continued throughout class, making it hard to focus. I could feel the constant gaze of a few students on me, but I kept my head down and focused on the test in front of me. After 2 long hours, I finally submitted my papers and made my way to grab my bag. But as I was leaving, a guy stopped me, his face twisted into a cruel smirk. "Hey, free giver," he teased, blocking my path. I tried to move away, but he wouldn't budge. "I believe you are a cheerful giver, and I haven't been with a werewolf, less a chubby one like you," he mocked, and I felt my blood boil. "Get away, you prick," I warned, but another guy stepped forward, his eyes full of malice. "Stop acting innocent and naive. We know you want us. You basically want every dude in this school," he sneered, and the rest of the class erupted in laughter. I felt my face flush with anger and humiliation, but I refused to let them get to me. "Let me pass," I demanded, my voice shaking. "And if we don't, what will you do, you?" one of the guys asked, and I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. I spat back, feeling a hand slap across my face. I stared at him, tears filling my eyes, my body shaking with rage. "You lay your hand on me!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "I did, and what will you do about it?" he taunted, but Dora appeared at my side. "Let's go. He's a strong vampire, and you can't fight him," she whispered, pulling me away from the group. As we left the class, I heard the whispers and murmurs grow louder, some filled with disgust, others with pity. Dora and I sat under a tree, both of us silent as we tried to calm down. "What happened? Who is he?" Dora asked, her voice soft and gentle. "I got drunk and wasted at a bar, so he decided to help me, nothing else," I explained, feeling ashamed. "I fully understand," Dora said, her eyes full of understanding, but her words were cut off by a group of girls led by Vera. "Who do we have here?" "My popular sister," she sneered, forcing me to my feet. "I'm not AW*E!" I yelled, my voice full of anger and frustration. "Of course you are," she mocked, her 3 friends cackling behind her. "I knew you always wanted to be popular and get noticed like me. You always wanted to have what I have. So good luck in your newfound fame." She mocked and turned to leave, but I slapped her cheek. Without saying a word, I picked up my bag and raced towards the gate. I ran out of school and continued running until I got a cab. I directed the cab to take me to the mansion because I didn't want to go home and see the disappointed look on my dad's face. Within a few minutes, I arrived at the mansion, paid for the taxi, and exited the car. I rang the bell and was allowed into the mansion. As I approached the sitting room, I said hi to everyone I met on my way until I met Lady Emma in the sitting room. She was surprised to see me because she wasn't expecting me until 4 p.m., but I explained and told her I had nothing to do after my test. "Are you okay?" she asked, running a quick gaze over me. "Yes, I am," I responded with a weak smile, and by the look on her face, I knew she was not convinced, but she decided to let it go. "Here." She handed me the keys, and I made my way to the library. I got in, switched on the light, and cleaned the library. I also dusted the books, ensuring everything was intact, before sitting behind my desk. I picked up a book and tried to read, but my mind was filled with worries and concerns. Out of curiosity, I picked up my phone and flicked through images of happy students, but my thumb suddenly stopped on a picture of me carried in the arms of Lord Madison. I couldn't believe someone would have taken a picture of us, let alone posted it for everyone to see. As I stared at the photo, I noticed dozens of comments underneath it. I clicked on them, my eyes scanning the words with growing horror. People were making fun of me, calling me names, and even accusing me of things I never did. The tears started to well up in my eyes as I read the hateful messages. Ignore them, Lolita urged, telling me that it didn't matter what they said, and their words couldn't hurt me. But deep down, I knew that their cruelty was taking its toll. I felt exposed and vulnerable, as if everyone was watching and judging me. I couldn't understand why someone would want to hurt me like this. As the tears spilled down my cheeks, I felt a surge of anger. I wanted to scream at these people, to ask them to mind their own business and leave me alone. But I knew that it wouldn't make any difference. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned off my phone and dropped it on the desk. As I tried to compose myself, the door opened, and Lord Madison walked in, dressed in a black shirt and a pair of black jeans. I held his gaze for a moment and quickly looked away, but he had caught me crying. "Greetings," I stood to my feet and lowered my head with respect, but he didn't respond to it. "What's the matter?" he demanded, but I didn't respond. "Are you going to talk, or should I make you talk?" He spoke with threats, and despite not knowing what he was up to, I didn't want more problems in my life. With a sigh, I picked up my phone, scrolled to the picture, and handed the phone to him, which he reluctantly took and fixed his gaze on it. I watched the expressionless look on his face change to anger. He was angry and wasn't even hiding it. I saw him scroll down to the comments section and read a few before dropping the phone on the desk. "Do you know who might have done it?" he asked, and I shook my head. "It's definitely not your sister. The picture was posted at 7 p.m. yesterday, and we were all together at the table then," he grumbled and left the library. With a frustrated sigh, I closed my eyes for a moment, wondering how my life would have turned out if I were slender. Perhaps I wouldn't be getting these hateful comments from people. After composing myself, I picked up a book and began reading, but I was interrupted by Lord Madison walking into the library. He got to the desk and glared at me for a moment before speaking. "The video has been taken down, and the person behind the post has been caught," he said, confusing me. "And why didn't you communicate with me when you saw it?" he asked. I didn't respond, but instead, I asked, "Who was it that posted it?" "A vampire. He attends your school, and I will deal with him," he muttered as a promise, still holding my gaze. "I heard you have been a victim of bullying," he said, while I gulped and looked away. "You have to speak to someone," he tried to speak, but I cut him off. "Why do you care?" I asked, irritated by his sudden caring attitude toward me. "Because I have to," he groaned, looking away. "What do you mean?" I asked and received a heavy sigh from him. "Nora's POV, I don't get what you mean," I asked, confused and curious about what he meant. He stared at me for a moment before turning away. I thought he would leave, but he stood still with his back to me. "I had a sister who was just like you," he announced, and I furrowed my eyebrows. "I was 3 years older than her," he added, making me curious about what he was trying to say. "When I turned 18, I became really busy. The two beings inside me took a toll on me, and I had to undergo several trainings. Some weeks, I would be at the werewolves camp undergoing training, while other weeks, I would be in the vampire clan attending seminars and training," he said, further piquing my interest in where he was heading. "I was hardly home, and whenever I came home, my sister would always welcome me with a big smile on her face, but I never knew she was being bullied. I was too busy with my life that I didn't notice it because she always put on this big smile on her face." He spoke, and this time I realized his voice was breaking, and he was doing his best to speak firmly. Everyone in the family was so busy with their lives and duties. Mother was always traveling around the world for seminars, father was busy with the clan's activities, and I was busy with my trainings. No one paid attention to her. He went silent for a moment, and without being told, I knew he was holding himself from breaking down. I was dumbfounded to see the almighty Lord Madison breaking down in my presence. Although I couldn't see his face, I knew his eyes were clouded with tears. One day, while I was training, I got a strange feeling in me and decided to end training for that day. I got home, and while on my way to my room, my wolf sensed something strange and directed me to her room. I knocked a few times and didn't get a response. Out of panic, I opened the door and met my sister lying on the floor in a pool of her blood. I hurriedly went to her and made her rest in my lap. I tried to heal her, but my abilities weren't working. He paused and began sobbing, and I didn't know when tears welled in my eyes. I knew that despite how long it had been, the memories were painful for him. On the verge of death, she told me some bullies had raped her. She told me she was pregnant and had taken some drugs, which resulted in her condition. He took a deep breath before continuing, "She died in my arms, and I couldn't do anything about it." He spoke regretfully while I made my way to him. After her death, I made some inquiries and discovered that my sister was bullied because of her body size. She didn't have friends, and the ones who came close to her were just using her as a pawn to get to me. I found out that she was never happy and was always seen crying by the maid, but no one told us about it, and we didn't notice because we were all so busy. He yelled at himself while I stood an inch away from him. I publicly killed the 3 who raped her, and from that day, I never spoke to my mother again until this day. I blamed her for my sister's death because if she had been a good mother, she would have known what her daughter was going through. He spoke with hate and turned to face me. The moment I held his gaze, I gasped and stepped backward. His black piercing eyes were filled with blood and looked so scary. When he noticed my reaction, he closed his eyes for a moment and opened them. This time, his eyes were back to their shades of black. "Whenever I see you or any plus-size girl, I always see my late sister in you. I would have left you at the club when you blacked out, but I couldn't because I worried you might fall into bad hands," he announced, while I held his gaze with a grateful smile. "I couldn't help my sister then, but I can help you now," he muttered and took a step towards me. "Why were you crying in your sleep that night?" he questioned, but I quickly looked away with a gulp. "I don't want you to end up like my sister and other bullied." He didn't get to finish his statement as I cut in, "I won't end up like her. We are 2 different ladies." "Who told you that I'm being bullied?" I asked, trying to hide the hurt in my voice. He took another step closer to me, and when I tried to take a step back, he grabbed me by the waist and pulled me to himself, making my breasts hit his bosom. With terrified eyes, I held his gaze, but before I could pull away, the door opened, and Alpha Leo stepped in. I blurted in shock and moved away from Lord Madison, but it was too late. He had seen us. I watched Alpha Leo and Lord Madison exchange a glare while none of them said a word until Lord Madison looked my way for a second before saying, "We are not done having this conversation." With those words, he turned and left, leaving me with Alpha Leo. "Greetings." I greeted him with a bow, but didn't get a response. I lifted my gaze and met his gaze. He had an expressionless look on his face, which made it difficult for me to detect his mood. "His wolf is angry," Lolita whispered while I ignored her. "May I help you with anything?" I asked. "What were you 2 doing?" he questioned, taking a step away from the door. "We were just having a conversation," I defended, but he scoffed and stood a few steps away. "You are not his type." he said, causing my eyebrows to furrow, confused. He lost his mate and wife a few months ago and wants to use you as a distraction. He added, don't get your hopes high with him. With those words, he turned and left. Alpha Leo's POV jealousy? Definitely not. I took the stairs to the living room and met Madison on the phone. I took the seat beside him, but my mind was on something else. The way I saw them in the room was suspicious, and no matter how hard I wanted to wave it off, I just couldn't. Ethan kept buzzing my head with stupid thoughts, and out of curiosity, I waited for him to drop the call. Do you have something to say to me? He asked as he ended the call. What was the meaning of what I saw in there? I questioned, not believing I would be asking such. And what exactly did you see? Madison responded with raised eyebrows, sounding completely innocent. Stop this, you know what I mean. I spoke in a demanding tone and saw him hold my gaze for a moment before saying, I believe whatever is happening between us is of no concern to you, or is there something I should know? He asked, his tone challenging. I frowned and looked away. Madison was too smart. I knew he had sensed something off about my behavior towards Nora. Something like what? I asked, hoping to deflect the conversation. I don't know, why don't you tell me? Madison shot back with a questioning gaze. I let out an exasperated sigh and closed my eyes, ignoring the persistent nagging of Ethan in my head. Never mind, pretend like I didn't ask, I said, feeling defeated. We both remained silent until I heard Madison speaking again, put him in one of my basements, I will be there by nightfall. Madison's words opened my eyes, don't bother, the Vampire King won't say a word. I have already told him a follower of his misbehaved and must be punished. He told the person over the phone, making me more curious. From the phone call, I realized a vampire must have offended him, and I felt pity for that vampire because Madison was brutal when it came to serving punishment, and I wondered what the person must have done. What did he do? I asked the moment he dropped the call. He remained silent for a while before saying, he is a bully. A bully? I wanted to make sure I heard him right. Yes. He responded, getting me more confused. Who did he bully? I asked because I knew whoever the person must have bullied must be important to Madison. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he held my gaze for a moment before saying, you should warn your people against bullying. His words made me confused. You have to set severe punishment for all bullies. He added, and then realization hit me, the bullied person was a werewolf, sending anger down my spine. Who was it that was bullied? I asked. Nora. He responded without holding back. His words took me aback. His words sent a different type of anger through me, something I had never felt before. Mine. My wolf howled, angered by what he just heard. What did you say? I asked again. You heard me right, he responded. I became furious and at the same time, jealous. I was angry that Nora was a victim of bullying, and at the same time, I was jealous that Madison was the one she talked to about it and not me. And why would she tell you? Ethan asked angrily, you are also bullying her. He yelled, I'm the only one allowed to bully her. No one is entitled to bully her except for me. I spoke possessively to myself. Did he touch her? I threw that question to Madison, who stared at me for a moment before asking, why do you care? Because she is my. I paused when I realized what I was about to say. You're what? Madison asked with raised eyebrows. She is my subject, and as her alpha, her problem is mine, I responded, getting a disapproving howl from Ethan, who was not pleased with my response. We both remained silent until Madison spoke. "No need to stress over the matter, I'm taking care of it," he tried speaking, but I cut him off. "It's my business, hand the dude over to me, I'll take care of him myself." I spoke possessively and held the curious gaze of Madison. "Is there something you are not telling me?" he asked. "I thought you hated this lady." "Why so worked up?" he asked, demanding an answer from me, but I didn't give any. With a groan, I stood to my feet and climbed the stairs. I reached the library, opened the door, and met her going through the shelves of books. She held my gaze and was surprised to see me again. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, but I didn't say a word. Instead, I held her gaze, and for the first time, I noticed she had beautiful sets of sea blue eyes. "Mine," Ethan howled, forcing me to approach her, but I held myself. "Who was it?" I asked and saw her eyebrows confused. "Who?" she asked, causing me to release a heavy sigh. I didn't know what I was doing or why I felt so much anger and jealousy. "Did he lay a hand on you?" I asked, getting her more confused. "I heard you were bullied." "Who was he? Give me his name." I saw confusion written all over her face, but she responded quickly. "I was not bullied." "Lies!" I yelled and stepped towards her. "You told him, and you can't tell me," I said, hating myself for feeling this way. It was the mate bond influencing my emotions. "Why do you care, Alpha Leo?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. I took a deep breath to calm myself before responding, "Because you are my subject, and as your alpha, it is my duty to defend you and anyone being bullied." Ethan snickered under his breath, calling me a liar, but I brushed it off. "So, tell me, who was it?" I demanded, my frustration growing. "You don't have to worry about it, Lord Madison has taken care of it," she replied, causing my anger to flare up. Without thinking, I blurted out, "I'm your mate, not him." Nora's POV. I heard him, I wasn't exaggerating or building words in my head. Did he call me his mate? I held his gaze and realized he was angry with what he had just said. He didn't mean it, it was a mistake which he regrets. We both remained silent, and just when he was about to speak, the door opened, revealing Lord Madison. I heard the angry groan from Alpha Leo as he walked out of the room. "What is wrong with him?" my wolf questioned, but I just shrugged my shoulders and held the gaze of Lord Madison. He didn't say a word. Instead, he also left, leaving me confused. "Something is wrong," Lolita spoke, getting me worried. I was still in my thoughts when I noticed my phone ringing. I went for it and picked it up when I realized it was Dora calling. "Hi!" I greeted. "The post has been brought down, and our school Instagram page has been suspended," she spoke while I released a heavy sigh and sat on the seat. "Do you know who must have done it?" she asked, curiosity creeping into her voice. "I don't." I lied. I couldn't tell her who it was because I wanted to avoid furthering the conversation. "Maybe it's a good Samaritan," she concluded, and I agreed, with a hum. "Are you okay?" she asked worriedly. "I'm fine, you should know I'm already used to things like this." I sighed, "You will be fine, I'll see you tomorrow," she said, and we both ended the call. I kept back the phone and indulged myself in reading books until the door opened, and Lady Christabel walked in with her usual friendly smile. "How have you been?" she greeted me as she made her way with 2 shopping bags in her hands. "Greetings, my lady," I greeted while getting on my feet. "Please sit, you don't have to always act formally around me," she spoke and kept the 2 shopping bags on the table. This Saturday is my birthday, and I'm celebrating it here at the mansion, so I thought of getting you this as my appreciation for bravely standing up for me the other day," she said, bringing a happy smile to my face. This was the first time I received a gift from someone apart from my father, Maxwell, and Dora. "Thanks, my queen," I said, entirely grateful. "They are all your size. Wear them to my birthday party." She smiled and walked away, while I smiled and watched her leave. When she closed the door, I brought out the first item from the first bag and realized it was a long navy blue dress. The left side of the dress was split from my feet up to the lower part of my left lap. The upper part of the dress was embroidered with silver stones, and the hands were off-shoulder. A big smile appeared on my face as I dropped the dress and went for the other bag. I took out the item, and a big smile appeared on my face when I realized it was silver heel shoes designed with stones. "This is beautiful," Lolita praised, and I agreed with her. I kept back the items and sat back in my seat with a big smile, forgetting all my worries. A few hours later, I switched off all the lights in the library, locked the door, and went downstairs. I handed the keys to Lady Emma and left the sitting room. When I got outside, I met Lord Madison, standing beside a red jeep with folded arms. I lowered my head and tried walking away, but he gestured for me to come to him. "What is he up to?" Lolita asked with a grumble as I made my way to him. I got to where he stood, and without saying a word, he opened the car door, gesturing me to go in. "Where are we going?" I asked, but he didn't give an answer. When I realized he wouldn't give an answer, I had no option rather than getting inside the car while he closed it. I watched him walk to the other side of the car and hop into the driver's seat. "Seat belt," he spoke, and I did as instructed. He started the car's engine and drove towards the gate. As he approached the opened gate, I saw Alpha Leo walking into the mansion in just a pair of jean shorts, sweating profusely, and without being told, I knew he was returning from the woods. He stared at the window of the car, and luckily, it was tinted, but I knew he felt I was inside because I saw him stop and stare at the car as Lord Madison drove out of the mansion. I felt uneasy in my seat and glared in Lord Madison's direction, whose gaze was fixed on the road. "Should I tell you the direction to my house?" I asked, unsure of where we were heading. "That won't be needed for now," he said, and continued driving. I wanted to ask him where he was taking me, but I wasn't scared because, for a strange reason, I felt he wouldn't harm me. After a 20-minute drive, he blew his horn in front of a black gate, which instantly opened. He drove inside, and I noticed 4 men stood at each corner of the warehouse. They lowered their head to Lord Madison, who stepped out of the car and beckoned me to follow. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was too late to turn back. But curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped out of the car and followed him towards the warehouse. We made our way through a maze of underground stairs and hallways. The only light came from the dim bulbs overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete walls. Finally, we arrived in a basement. It was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. Lord Madison didn't seem to notice, walking confidently ahead. As we walked deeper into the basement, I began to feel increasingly uneasy. There was something about this place that felt dangerous, like we were walking into a trap. But Lord Madison seemed completely at ease. He led me past a row of heavy steel doors, each locked and bolted. Finally, we arrived at a small wooden door at the end of a dark hallway. For the first time, he turned and held my gaze. "You seem tougher than you look." With those words, he opened the door and stepped in, waiting for me to join him. "Come in." He gestured, and with everything in me, I summoned all the courage I could gather before stepping in. As I stepped in, a series of fear ran down my body, but I composed myself and watched him close the door. "Lights on," he said, and I heard footsteps before the bulbs went on. Before me was the same guy who slapped me, tied to a chair, his eyes blindfolded, and his mouth gagged. Nora's POV with dumbfounded eyes, I stared at Lord Madison, who didn't look my way. I watched him march forward to the dude, forcefully take the gag off his mouth, and punch him in the face. "Holy Goddess," Lolita whispered while I stared with shocked-filled eyes. When he told me the person behind the post had been caught, I thought he had probably been handed over to the authorities. I never knew he would be locked up in a basement. "Take off the blindfold," he told one of the men who stood behind the tied dude. I watched them remove the blindfold and saw the terrified look on his face when he realized it was Lord Madison standing before him. "Lord," he tried speaking, but his words got stuck in his mouth as Lord Madison threw a blow at him, causing his nose to bleed. "You think you are smart?" Lord Madison asked through gritted teeth, but the dude shook his head, terrified and scared for his life. "I didn't show your face, it was only her," he tried speaking but stopped when he noticed me at the door. He blurted out in shock, and shook his head, "Please forgive me, I didn't reveal your face," he pleaded, breaking down in tears. "You see, that's the problem, you saw me, took a picture of me, but didn't reveal my face, rather, you revealed the face of an innocent lady just because you are a bully." Lord Madison spoke in a low tone, but the anger in his voice could be felt. "We wouldn't be having this conversation if you had minded your business or, better still, revealed just my face and left her out of it," he yelled and threw another punch in his face. With terrified eyes, I watched the face of the dude covered in blood, and the sight of it broke my heart. "Please stop it," I pleaded with Lord Madison, who held my gaze for a moment and gestured for me to come. With a gulp, I approached them and stood a few steps away from him. "He laid his hand on you, right?" Lord Madison asked and I couldn't respond. "Do the same to him," he ordered, but I couldn't do it. "It's okay, this is okay." I tried pleading, but the angry groan of Lord Madison stopped me. "Either you do it, or I'll do it, and you know what that means," he threatened while avoiding my gaze. "Just do it," Lolita urged me, and with all the courage I could gather, I lifted my hand and slapped him. He whined in pain while I stared at my hand, which was stained with his blood. "Get me a knife," he told one of the men, while my eyes widened with shock. "Knife? What for?" I asked, terrified of what he wanted to do. He didn't respond to me, but instead, he took the knife from the man and ran his finger at the edge of it. "You like bullying others because of their looks and appearance, right?" he asked, but the dude shook his head, terrified to speak. "Why don't I make you a subject of bullying, so you'll get to see how it feels?" he threatened while running the edge of the knife on the cheek of the dude. "Please stop it," I pleaded, but it fell on deaf ears. Instead, I saw two men walk up to me and block my path from seeing what he was about to do. "Don't do it, I have forgiven him," I yelled in panic, but it fell on deaf ears, and all I could hear were the loud screams of pain from the dude. With tear-filled eyes, I wondered what he was doing to him. This was not how I wanted it to be. Two wrongs cannot make a right. The two men blocking my path moved away, allowing me to see what Lord Madison was doing. I watched him place his hand on the pierced face of the dude, close his eyes, and heal the dude. Confused, I watched what he was doing, only to realize he had healed the cut on the dude's face, but the marks were invisible. "You will live with these marks for the rest of your life," he announced, while the dude cried bitterly, shivering with pain and fear, "Let's see how you would feel when you wake up every day seeing this mark on your face. People will call you the dude with cuts on his face, and I believe then you'll know how it feels to be looked down on." With those words, he dropped the knife on the floor and walked up to me. Out of anger, I couldn't hold his gaze, but I followed him out of the basement. We got into his car. I put on my seatbelt and stared out the window. The drive was silent until he stopped at my home without getting my address. "Thank you," I said, and tried going for the doorknob of the car, but he stopped me by gripping my wrist. I moved my gaze in his direction and held his gaze. "He deserves what he got." He tried defending his actions, but I shook my head and said, "That was not what I wanted." I responded, "Did you bother to ask me if I wanted a payback or all of this?" I asked and saw the guilt on his face. "I'm sorry to say this, but what you did in there was wrong." The cuts on his face were absolutely wrong. I said and went for the doorknob, and this time he didn't stop me. I left the car, and without looking back, I entered the house. I met my father and mother in the sitting room, and without saying a word to them, I took the stairs up to my room. I got to my room, sat on my bed, and pondered in thought, regretting my actions. I knew he had gone too far, but my actions were ungrateful. He did what he thought was right, and I shouldn't have spoken to him that way. With a frustrated sigh, I took off my clothes, took a cold bath, and changed into my pajamas. I lay on the bed, and just as I was about to go to sleep, I heard a voice in my head. "Come downstairs. I'm waiting for you." The voice sounded deep and husky. This was the first time I heard his voice through Mind Link. "I believed you heard me." He spoke again after not getting a response from me. "I'm on my way." I stammered and left the bed. I checked the wall clock and realized it was past 10 p.m. and wondered what he was doing at my house at such an hour of the night. I put a jacket around my shoulders and left the room. I arrived at the sitting room and met no one there. "What is he up to?" Lolita questioned, but I shrugged my shoulders and left the house. When I got outside, I met Lord Madison with the dude he tortured, but this time something was different. There were no marks on his face, nor was there any trace of blood. "What?" Before I could speak, the dude fell on his knees before me. "I'm sorry for what I did. Please forgive me," he pleaded. With stunned eyes, I stared at Lord Madison, who had an expressionless look on his face. "I apologize for the pain I caused you, and I promise I will never do such to you or anyone else," he begged sincerely while I held the gaze of Lord Madison, whose arms were folded on his chest. With a gulp, I held the dude's gaze and nodded, "I have forgiven you." I spoke honestly and got a relieved smile from him. "Thank you so much," he said, standing to his feet. "You can leave." I told him and saw him run away while lowering his head to Lord Madison. I locked eyes with Lord Madison and didn't know where to start talking. "I believe this is what you wanted," he said, and tried getting into his car, but I grabbed his wrist. When I realized what I had done, I quickly withdrew. "I'm sorry." I apologized. "You are sorry? For what?" he asked with raised eyebrows. By the tone of his voice, I could tell he was mad at me, and I hated myself for what I did. "You are angry at me," I tried speaking, but he said, "I'm not angry. If I'm angry, even the hair on your body would feel it," he said and caressed my cheek with the tips of his fingers, sending cold shivers down my spine. He took his hand off my cheek, got into his car, and drove off while I touched my cheek with a smile. "Wipe away such thoughts from your head," Lolita cursed under her breath. Lord Madison's POV. As I drove off, I couldn't help but wonder what was actually happening to me. I knew I wanted to help this girl from the first day I saw her crying in her sleep, but I didn't realize it would go to this extent. Something was off about the whole thing, and I tried to communicate with my wolf, but he had been silent for the past 4 months since the death of my mate and wife, Gracie. I knew my wolf was still with me, but I just couldn't connect with him because he was still in pain and mourning the death of his mate. I was also mourning her, but as a king, I had to be strong for my clan. The pain I felt 4 months ago was unbearable. I stayed locked up in my room for days without food and water, and it's a miracle that I survived that phase. The silence of my wolf got me worried, and I visited a seer who told me that my wolf was still mourning his mate and would come back to me when he was done. I have to remain patient. I drove into the mansion, handed the keys to the butler, and entered the sitting room. I reached the sitting room and met Leo, seated on a high stool at the bar. I walked over to him, sat, and poured myself a drink. As I sipped the whiskey, I could sense that Leo had something on his mind. His attitude towards me had been off lately, especially his intense hatred for Nora. I couldn't ignore it, and I couldn't help but wish that my wolf were active to help me to understand his motives. "Don't you think it's too early?" he asked, eyeing the bottle of whiskey on the bar. "I don't understand," I replied, confused. Leo took a deep breath before looking my way, his gaze piercing. "Don't you think it's too early to start flirting with another woman, especially when you've just lost your mate and unborn child?" he asked, and I felt anger simmering inside me. "Don't get me wrong, I have no business with what you do, but remember, people will talk about what?" I asked with fuming rage. "What would they say?" "They'll say you're seeing another woman just a few months after Gracie's death," he replied bluntly, not holding back. "And who is this woman that you're talking about?" I demanded, feeling defensive. Leo remained silent, and then in one swift movement, he stood up, turning to leave. "I believe you already know the answer to that," he said, his back to me as he walked away. Left alone with my thoughts, I felt guilt twinge in my chest. By his words, does it mean I didn't mourn Gracie enough? Perhaps I should still be locked in my room, heartbroken and in pain. I wondered as I stood up and took the bottle of whiskey with me. Climbing the stairs to my room, Leo's words kept nagging at me. Even though I knew he was wrong, I felt guilty. I had lost my mate barely 4 months ago and shouldn't be talking to a woman, let alone making friends with one. As I mulled over Leo's accusations, I realized that my wolf was still mourning the death of his mate, even though I was already up and about, acting silly. I entered my room and sat on the bed, taking a large gulp of whiskey and painfully swallowing it down my throat. Perhaps, Leo was right. It was too soon to move on from the morning. With a sigh, I closed my eyes, and memories of that fateful day replayed in my head. "Why don't you stay?" Gracie asked, but I shook my head and placed a kiss on her bloated stomach. "This is a very important meeting, and it's just a few miles away. I will be back before nightfall," I assured her, kissing her forehead before moving down to her lips and kissing them tenderly. I heard her sigh in the kiss as I withdrew from her and made my way to the door. "Come home quickly," she urged as I left the room. After a 2-hour drive, I arrived in the next town. As I was about to leave the car, my wolf, Simeon, felt something was wrong with my mate. Quickly, I got back into the car and instructed Stephen, my personal driver, to drive me back home. As he drove, I tried to connect with her through our mind link. Her response was barely a whisper. So, I reached out to her personal maid and found out that she had missed a step on the staircase, fallen, and gone into emergency labor. Panic and fear took over as I sat uncomfortably in my seat, making mind links with the doctors to ensure they were doing all they could for her. What should have been a 2-hour journey took only 1 hour and 10 minutes. When I got to the hospital, I rushed to the emergency hall and met her gynecologist coming out of the delivery room. She held my gaze with tears-filled eyes, shook her head, and sent cold shivers down my spine. For a moment, everything around me spun, and my body became numb. No! My wolf howled, pushing me forward and returning me to my senses. I rushed into the emergency room and found Gracie already dead with our babies still in her womb. No! I yelled, and all the bulbs in the room exploded. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch her lifeless body, but my abilities were useless. She had already passed away before I even arrived at the hospital. For the past 3 months, I was a shadow of myself. My chiefs and people were scared of losing me. They begged me to come out of my mourning, but I didn't heed to their request until 3 weeks ago, when I saw Gracie in my dream. She looked so happy and beautiful. She asked me to move on with my life and that she was fine in the place of eternal rest. After that dream, I decided to pick myself up and accept the invitation of Aunt Christabel, and here again, I'm being reminded of a past I was forgetting. I opened my eyes and realized I had emptied the bottle of whiskey, but I was lucky that a mini bar was in the room. Wobbly on my feet, I stumbled over to the bar, snatched 2 bottles of liquor, and returned to bed. I opened the first bottle, downing a huge gulp of it, letting sadness blanket me. Throughout the night, I drank in sorrow, recalling the past. I thought I was over it. In the morning, a maid knocked on the door, informing me of breakfast, but I sent her away. At noontime, another maid came, and I did the same. A knock came on the door before Aunt Christabel spoke from outside. "Are you okay?" she asked with concern. I sighed heavily before responding, "I'm fine, I just want to be left alone." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Did something happen?" Her voice was filled with worry, but I remained silent. "Are you sure you're okay? You've been in your room for almost a day, and it's making us all concerned. Can I come in and see you?" She pleaded with me, but I cut her off abruptly. "I'll leave if you keep disturbing me," I threatened harshly, my voice low and dangerous. "Alpha Leo's POV, what did he say?" I asked Mother, who was descending the stairs. "He threatened to leave if I kept bothering him," she whispered and took a seat. With a heavy heart and a sense of guilt, I wandered around the living room, lost in thought. I knew what I said was wrong and foolish, but I couldn't explain the bitterness I felt toward seeing them together. I spoke rashly, and now I was full of regret. "You still haven't answered my questions," Ethan spoke up, causing me to release a frustrated sigh. "Were you jealous or nothing?" I interrupted, groaning. "It was nothing, and definitely not jealousy. Besides, what's there to be jealous of?" I scoffed, trying to brush off his questioning. "Everything, my wolf," Ethan retorted, causing me to scoff again and turn away. I turned my gaze in Emma's direction and asked, "Is the librarian coming today?" She shook her head and said, "I can send for her if you need her services." I declined and took a seat. "What should we do?" my mother asked, sounding worried. But I couldn't answer. I was the cause of all of this and had to fix it myself. "I'll be back," I told Mother before leaving the sitting room. I climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, approached his room, and knocked on the door. "Hey, buddy, can we talk?" I pleaded, but he didn't respond. "He won't let you in or listen to you, so give it up," Ethan grumbled. But I remained silent, thinking of a plan. I left the room and returned to the sitting room. Without a word to my mother, I made my way to the backyard of the mansion, where Madison's room window was located. When I looked up, I was relieved to see his window open. Without hesitation, I began to climb the wall, grateful that his room was on the second floor. I reached the window and jumped into the room. Madison looked at me for a moment before standing up. I could see the anger in his eyes as I held his gaze with guilt. Within a few hours, he had returned to his former grieving self, and I was surprised to see empty bottles littered around the room. It baffled me that he had drank all of them by himself. "Are you here to remind me of how terrible I am?" he spat, his voice laced with pain and anger. I opened my mouth to speak, but he immediately cut me off. "There's no need for you to say anything," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were just reminding me of things I shouldn't be doing." I held his gaze, waiting for him to finish. "I'll be leaving and returning to my country and kingdom after Aunt's birthday party. Now, please, leave, or I'll leave myself," he threatened, his tone cold and demanding. Nora's POV walking through the school gate, I could still feel eyes on me, but not as intense as yesterday. I made my way to class, and as I went to my usual spot, I noticed the boy who had been tortured by Lord Madison. We held a gaze, and to my surprise, he smiled at me and waved. "Did he just do that?" Lolita asked as I smiled and shyly waved back at him. I reached my usual spot and saw that Dora was already seated. "What was that?" she asked as I took the seat beside her. "What?" I asked, pretending ignorance. "Did Joshua just smile and say hi to you?" she asked while I smiled and shrugged my shoulders. I knew she wanted to ask me a million questions, but luckily the professor walked in, and we all had to keep silent. Throughout the class, I couldn't help but think of last night. I thought of Lord Madison and how kind he was to me. If it weren't for him, that picture would still be on the internet. After the first class, I learned that the next course would be with Vera, and I hate the thought of sharing a class with her. She always tried to prove that she was superior to me, and I, the lesser twin. Dora and I walked to the big hall where the joint course would take place. Dora chattered about a party happening next weekend, but I wasn't really paying attention. When we entered the class, Vera was already seated with her clique of friends in her usual spot. Our eyes met, and she gave me an annoying smile that I tried to ignore. Dora and I took our regular seats, waiting for the professor. Suddenly, Vera stood up and walked towards us. "Hi, everyone," she greeted with her usual charming smile that no man could resist. "Hi, Vera," most of the students responded. "I have some news to share with you guys," Vera announced, turning the side of her neck towards us. "I have found my mate," she spoke excitedly, causing a buzz among the students. Some were disappointed that they could no longer pursue her, while others were annoyed by her attention-seeking behavior. "Guess who he is?" she exclaimed, placing both hands on her waist. "It's Alpha Leo." "Yes, you heard me right. The mighty Alpha Leo. And now, I bear his mark," she announced proudly. The students whispered in shock and disbelief. As I stared at the mark on her neck, an uncomfortable feeling filled my stomach. However, I ignored it, trying to focus on my book. "We might be getting married soon. You all sit tight," she said with a smirk, looking towards me. "No," I whispered in defeat and pain. Lolita whined, asking with a low voice, "Are they getting married?" My heart felt heavy, and my eyes were blurry with tears. But, I refused to let them fall. "Could you please go back to your seat?" Professor Tim's voice interrupted the tensioned atmosphere, and Vera obeyed. The lecture began, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Why her, and not me? These questions kept weighing me down. Why would he want to inflict so much pain on me? Why choose my sister when there were thousands of girls in the pack? Are you okay? Dora asked, and I nodded, but tears dropped on my book. Are you crying? She asked, but I nodded and looked away. I knew she wanted to ask me a million questions, but I decided to wait until after class. After the lesson, I picked up my bag to leave the hall, but Vera stopped me. Hey, sis, she mocked as she walked up to me with her usual victorious smile. What do you want, Vera? I asked, annoyed and angry. No need to show your jealousy to everyone. I know you're jealous, but you don't have to let everyone know, she sneered while I scoffed before asking, are you done? I saw an evil smirk on her face before she leaned in close to my right ear and whispered, soon, I will have his baby, and he will have no choice but to marry me. You, my sister, will sit and watch all of this happen. She pulled away and flaunted a devilish smile before leaving with her clique of friends. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I could feel so many eyes on me, including those of Dora. Unable to control my emotions, I walked out of the hall and started making my way home, even though I still had one more class. I left school, ignoring my phone ringing in my pocket, and hailed a taxi. Once I was home, I let out a sob, feeling the weight of what Vera had said hitting me harder than I expected. I knew that no one would be home at this time. My parents were probably at the bakery, supervising the workers, and wouldn't be back for another 2 hours. With a relieved sigh, I took out my keys from my pocket and attempted to open the door, only to realize that it was already unlocked. Curious about who was in, I cautiously entered the house. As I walked into the sitting room, I was surprised to find my father reading a book. Our eyes met, and I couldn't help but remember what had happened the day before. The disappointment in his eyes and the sound of his voice echoed in my mind. I cleared my throat and timidly greeted him, "Good day, Dad." After a few seconds of silence, I quickly turned and made my way to my bedroom. As I dropped my bag and retrieved my phone from my pocket, I noticed 7 missed calls from Maxwell. I couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't just used our mind link to contact me. Curious of why he was calling, I called him, and it rang a few times before he picked. "Hey, I have been calling." He spoke worriedly. Why? I sighed and sat on the bed. "I thought it was Dora, why didn't you use the mind link?" I asked. "That's because I have been trying to reach you, but I have not been receiving any signals from you." "Are you okay?" he spoke, his voice filled with concern. "Yes, I'm fine," I responded with a sigh, and noticed he went silent for a while before speaking again. "Dad told me something," he said. "What did he say?" I asked, even though I knew what he wanted to tell me. "What happened?" "I want you to tell me," he said, and I remained silent for a moment before explaining everything to him. I told him about Lord Madison and how he only helped me because I was drunk and wasted. "So, you've met Lord Madison?" he asked, and I responded with a hum. "And why didn't you tell them it was him?" he asked. "Would that have changed anything?" I asked with a sigh. "You know what? I'm tired, Maxwell. I'm tired of everything," I mumbled in pain, and I noticed he went silent again before saying, "What happened? Is something wrong?" he asked while I gulped and nodded my head, even though he couldn't see me. "All is not well," I whispered in tears and told him everything that had happened in school while he silently listened. After I finished talking, I took a deep breath and waited for him to speak, but he remained silent. "Are you there?" I asked and heard him release a heavy sigh before speaking. "You should let him reject you," he said, his voice filled with seriousness and no sign of mischief. "What are you saying?" I tried to speak, shocked that he would make such a suggestion. "Listen, Nora, Alpha Leo doesn't deserve you, he deserves Vera. Tell him to reject you and I believe the moon goddess will grant you a second chance mate, someone who would love and cherish you," he suggested, but I shook my head, feeling Lolita kicks against it. "What if my wolf can't handle the pain? I can't bear losing her," I said, my voice filled with concern. "You won't lose her. She will endure the pain, but you won't lose her," he reassured me. But I couldn't bring myself to agree. "I can't, Maxwell. I can't put Lolita through that," I said firmly. There was a heavy sigh from him before he spoke again. "Just think about it," he said before ending the call. I dropped the phone on the bed and sat there lost in thought. I knew that Alpha Leo would never accept me, but I couldn't accept his rejection. The thought of losing the only thing that gave me comfort was terrifying. I wiped Maxwell's words from my mind and walked over to my desk. I turned on my laptop and wrote a few chapters of my book. When I looked at the clock, I realized it was already 6 p.m. Letting out a tired sigh, I stood up, took a quick shower, and headed downstairs for dinner. As I walked into the dining room, I noticed everyone was already seated and eating. "Hi, everyone," I greeted, but no one responded, not even Father. I picked up a plate and was about to serve myself some food when my mother spoke up. "I can't believe I gave birth to AW*E. She muttered under her breath. "I am not AW*E, and you know that, Mother," I yelled, slamming my hands on the table and standing up. "I'm not your mother. I stopped being your mother 19 years ago," my mother shouted, also standing up. "Nora's POV stopped being my mother?" I asked, confusion enveloping my entire being. "Yes, I stopped being your mother when you made me lose my unborn baby," she yelled, causing my eyes to widen with shock. "What?" I tried speaking, but Dad spoke up, "Stop it, we've talked about it." He tried talking to Mom, but she cut him off. "I won't be quiet, I have been quiet for a long time," she yelled, while I stared at her, wondering what she was talking about. "What are you saying?" I asked while my heart pounded in my chest. "You killed my child!" she yelled, staring at me with disgust and hatred. "My child was already 6 months old in my womb and because of your reckless behavior, I lost him," she yelled while I stared at my father, who had an expressionless look on his face, but I went on to ask, "What is Mother talking about?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I will tell you myself. I want you to live with the guilt of killing your own brother and damaging my womb in the process, you witch!" she yelled, causing my heart to seize in my chest. "It was a mistake," Dad tried defending, but she cut him off. "But it doesn't change the fact that my womb was damaged because of her," she yelled and walked to my side of the table. With stunned eyes, I watched her lift up her dress, displaying her stomach to me. "You see this? I have this scar because of you. Whenever I see this scar, it reminds me of the fact that I have to hate you every day of my life," she yelled while I stared at her as tears welled up in my eyes, wondering what she was talking about. "What did I do?" I asked, curious to know what she was trying to say to me. "Your mother got involved in an accident," Dad whispered, "and it's because of you," she yelled, cutting Dad off. "It was your fault. If only you listened to my words just like your sister and did as instructed, I wouldn't have had to run over to the road to save you from being hit by a car," she yelled through gritted teeth while hot tears streamed down my cheek, unable to hold them back. How did it happen, Mom? Vera asked as she placed her hand on Mother's left shoulder and began massaging it. Mother kept silent for a moment before she took a deep breath and opened her mouth to speak. You two were 4, and I decided to take you guys out to get some ice cream and snacks, she said while I stared at her with confused eyebrows. For all I could remember, I have no memories of going out with my mother. All the memories I have are memories of Dad taking me out, and that should be when I was 6 years old or thereabouts. I packed the car and told you guys to stay in the car and wait for me, and I thought you two heard me, but this witch left the car after I left. She followed me. I stood frozen as my mother screamed at me, her face red with pain and anger. I was almost at the shop when I began hearing horns. Out of curiosity, I turned to see what was happening, only to see this witch standing in the middle of the busy road. Out of panic, I ran towards her without looking and got hit by a fast-moving vehicle. She gulped in pain and closed her eyes for a moment before opening them. Her eyes were red and full of hate. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was at the hospital. She clutched her stomach and looked as though she was about to collapse. This is all your fault, she yelled. You caused me to lose my child and my womb because you refused to listen to me. Tears flowed down my cheeks as I tried to process her words. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could I have caused my mother so much pain? She continued to shout at me, her voice growing shrill with each passing moment. If you had just stayed in the car like I told you to, none of this would have happened. Her words hit me hard, and I could feel a heavy weight settling in my gut. I didn't know what to say or do. All I could do was shed more tears as I stood there and listened as my mother lashed out at me. You were just a child. Lolita tried comforting me, but it wasn't helping. I was the cause of Mother's hatred. How could I cause her so much pain? I'm sorry, Mom, I whispered. Sorry doesn't change anything. She cried out, her voice breaking. Now look at me. I've lost so many things because of your foolishness. I couldn't have another child, and it's all because of you. Why couldn't you just listen to me? Why did you have to follow me? How could you be so careless? She yelled while tears uncontrollably streamed down my face. I didn't mean for all this to happen, I was just 4, and I can't even remember any of this. I finally managed to speak. I didn't know what was going to happen. I pleaded. You are a witch, and I hate you. I hate ever having you. She yelled with hate. I couldn't take it anymore, so I turned and ran out of the house, sobbing uncontrollably. As I left, I heard my mother's cries of pain and anger echoing behind me. I walked on the cold street of our pack in just my nightwear. I sobbed loudly, not minding the few people passing by were staring at me. It felt like a knife had pierced through my heart, and the pain was consuming my entire being. With a heavy heart, I wiped away the tears as I continued my journey with no particular location in mind. My mind was blank, and all I could hear were my mother's words echoing in my head. With the hatred and anger I saw in her eyes, I knew she would never forgive me for the rest of her life. I roamed around the cold streets for hours until I finally got back home. With trembling hands, I opened the door, scared to see my mother again. I stepped into the sitting room and met Dad on the phone. The moment he saw me, he dropped the call and released a heavy sigh. Where did you go? He asked, but I couldn't give him a response. I was lost for words and couldn't speak. Whatever your mother said, he tried speaking, but I cut in, I'll leave. I announced, not holding Father's gaze. I will look for an apartment and... You are not going anywhere, Dad said disapprovingly, but I shook my head and turned to hold his gaze. I can't stay here. I said as fresh tears loitered in my eyes. I have caused Mother so much pain, and I believe it's great torture for her to wake up every morning and see me. She must have endured a lot, and I don't want her to go through such a thing again. I gulped before continuing. I can't stay here anymore. I can't bear to still look at my mother's face when I know what I did to her. I took a deep breath, drawing back my tears. Can I stay for a few weeks? I asked Dad but didn't get a response. Instead, he held my gaze, and I saw tears in his eyes. Good night, I whispered and turned to leave, not wanting to see him shed tears before me. I climbed the stairs to my room, lay on the bed, and covered myself with the blanket. I cried my eyes out until I finally fell asleep. The loud alarm from my phone woke me from my sleep. With a sigh, I left the bed and didn't bother to say my morning prayers or do any exercises. I went straight to the bathroom, bathed, and dressed in a blue flowery dress. I dried my hair and let it fall loose on my shoulders. I didn't bother to apply makeup to my face, despite how swollen and puffy my eyes looked. Are you okay? Lolita asked worriedly, while I nodded and picked up my things from the desk. As I descended the stairs, I couldn't help but remember all that had happened last night. Everything was still fresh in my head, like it had happened just a few minutes ago. As I reached the end of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the dining room but didn't bother to look or listen. Instead, I walked straight to the door, opened it, and left the house. I walked for a while to clear my head before boarding a taxi. Within a few minutes, I arrived at the mansion, paid the taxi driver, and exited the vehicle. I exchanged greetings with the workers as I made my way to the living room. I arrived in the living room and was told Lady Emma had gone to see her sick son and would be back later in the day, but she kept the keys to the library for me. I took the keys from the maid and climbed the stairs. My mind was filled with thoughts, but I brushed them off. As I reached the landing, I saw Lord Madison ascending toward me. With a friendly smile, I greeted him. Good morning, Lord Madison. I greeted but, however, to my surprise, Lord Madison glared at me with an icy stare, his eyes piercing through me. His response was cold and distant, as if I was an unwanted guest. Without uttering a word, he swiftly brushed past me and continued down the stairs, leaving me feeling confused. Nora's POV. As I straightened up the books in the library, my mind kept drifting back to what had happened on the stairs with him. The way he had looked at me had brought back memories of the first time we met at Alpha Leo's party. His gaze had made me feel uneasy then, and it was doing the same to me now. I couldn't help but wonder if it was because of the way I had spoken to him in the car. But then he came back to touch my cheek, and that had to be a good sign, right? So, why was he suddenly acting so cold towards me? I believe something happened when you were away, Lolita suggested, and I knew she was right, making me curious about what might have happened. Should I ask him? I asked worriedly, but Lolita kicked against it, saying, maybe it's nothing, he might just be in a bad mood, Lolita said, and I agreed with her. With a sigh, I brushed the thoughts of him away and focused on the task ahead. I finished arranging the library, and just as I was about to take my seat, I noticed a click on the door, turned my gaze towards it, and saw Alpha Leo walking in. Our gazes met, and I looked away, ignoring the howling of Lolita in my head. Greetings, Alpha Leo, I greeted, slightly lowering my head, and not expecting a response, but to my surprise, he responded, greetings, he answered, causing my eyes to widen with shock. This was actually the first time he responded to my greeting. I held his gaze with stunned eyes, but quickly lowered my gaze. How may I help you? I asked and didn't get a response from him. Instead, he sat on the couch, and when I realized he wouldn't say a word, I returned to my desk and sat behind it. I was uncomfortable with his presence and wondered what he wanted and why he was here. Maybe he is here to see you. Lolita spoke, but I scoffed and shook my head. That's impossible, perhaps he is here to read a book. I responded and switched on the desktop, trying to ignore Alpha Leo, who was seated across from me. Why were you crying? He spoke, and I raised my eyes while looking around to be certain he was talking to me. Yes, it's you. He said while holding my gaze. I'm not crying. I responded, finding his questions odd and strange. Silly, I'm talking of last night. Why did you cry yourself to sleep? He asked, while I stared at him with furrowed eyebrows, wondering how he got to know. I knew we were mates, but I hadn't borne his mark yet, so it was hard for him to feel my pain or cries. Although he could, but there were small chances of it. I don't know what you are talking about, I responded, finding the conversation odd and strange. Perhaps something was wrong with him, or maybe he had lost control of himself, and his wolf was controlling him. Terrible liar. He mumbled and stood to his feet. With a gulp, I watched him majestically walk toward me. He is hot, Lolita whispered while I ignored her. Your eyes are swollen. He paused and placed his hands on the desk. He lowered his head to me and leaned to my left ear. Hope you weren't crying because of me because it would be of no use, he whispered, causing a big frown to appear on my face. He moved away, and without looking my way, he turned and left. I cursed under my breath, angry at myself for thinking he was trying to change when it was obvious he was the same Alpha Leo who hated me. Well, Lolita wanted to defend him, but I shut her up and focused on the screen before me. I went on to check all the information on the books in the library, making sure no books were missing. While working, the door opened, shifting my gaze to the entrance. I noticed Lord Madison walked in with the same cold expression on his face. I quickly stood up and nervously tucked my hair behind my ears. May I help you with something? I spoke, but he ignored me and walked to a shelf. I watched him run his fingers through the books, searching for a particular book, until he stopped and took out a book. I watched him read the book's cover, open the first page, and read a few lines before closing it. He turned and approached me before placing the book on the desk. Take documentation of it. I'll return it on Monday. He spoke so coldly and intensely, I swear I have never heard such a tone from him. Don't just stand and look, take down the name. He urged, and I nodded before taking my seat. I picked up the book and read through. Things fall apart. I read it out and held his gaze briefly, but quickly looked away. I typed the book into the computer and documented it in the record book before handing it back to him. He took it, making sure he didn't touch my hand, and turned to leave, but I stopped him with my words. Is everything okay? I asked, while he remained silent, his back turned toward me. Did I do something wrong? I asked with a gulp, scared he would hate me too, like his cousin. He remained quiet, and after a long moment, he finally spoke, You shouldn't speak to me in such an informal manner. With those words, he walked away, leaving me heartbroken. He is angry with you, Lolita concluded, while I sat back in my seat, thinking about what I might have done. If we were cool before he drove off that night, then what could have happened? I kept asking myself, and neither Lolita nor I could respond. Throughout the day, I couldn't concentrate on work. Even when I tried to read a book to clear my head, I just couldn't help but drift my thoughts to Lord Madison, wondering what I might have done to make him speak to me so coldly. Just as I was pondering my thoughts, the door opened, and Vera walked in with her usual victorious smile, like the whole world was under her feet. "What are you doing here?" I asked with a frown. "This is where my mate lives, and soon I will live here." She spoke proudly, while I scoffed and shook my head. "He will never marry you, I mean, no man in his right mind will marry you." I sneered and noticed my words got to her. She clenched her fists and stared at me with anger, while I folded my arms, waiting for a comeback because I knew she had so many to use against me. "At least I'm not a murderer, unlike you." She spat while I stood, refusing to be moved by her words. "At least I'm not the one whose mate is ashamed to tell the world about her," she added, while I blinked my eyelashes uncontrollably, not wanting her words to get to me. "Are you done?" I asked, holding her gaze and trying to act tough. "If you are finished, then you can leave through the door. As you can see, I have work to do, and I am not as idle as you are, always asking for gifts and money from your numerous buddies." I cursed, unable to believe that I had actually said those words. For so long, I had practiced this line to say to her, but never had the courage to do so until now. "What did you say to me?" she asked, fuming with rage. "You heard me right, Vera, and there is no lie in it," I spoke, my anger matching hers. In the heat of the moment, she slapped me on the cheek, and without thinking, I returned the slap. This was the first time we had actually hit each other, and it felt strange. Vera had always mocked and insulted me, but I had never responded to her. "You slapped me?" she asked, holding her cheek. "You were the one who started it," I responded, feeling guilty for hitting her but knowing that I couldn't let her hit me and get away with it. "You will pay for this," she threatened before storming out of the room. I sighed heavily and sat back in my seat. "I'm proud of you," Lolita said proudly, but I rolled my eyes and picked up my book. I tried to lose myself in the story, but the sound of the door clicking interrupted me. Lady Emma walked in with a blank look and said, "The Luciano family wishes to see you in the living room." Without waiting for a response, she turned and left. Nora's POV. What do you think she must have said to them? Lolita asked worriedly while I shrugged my shoulders and descended the stairs. As I took the stairs, I was a bit worried. It was disrespectful to lay a hand on an alpha's mate, and even though she wasn't one, I knew I was in for big trouble because, to Lady Christabel, she was Alpha Leo's mate. I reached the sitting room and met everyone seated, including Lord Madison, whose gaze was fixed on the book in his hands. Vera was seated beside Alpha Leo. Her head rested on his chest. I gulped, ignoring the whining of my wolf. I held Lady Christabel's gaze and noticed she was furious. "Did you lay a hand on Vera?" she asked angrily, in a tone she hadn't used on me. I gulped and thought of what to say, and just when I was about to respond, she spoke. "You know it's taboo to lay a hand on your alpha's mate and the soon-to-be Luna of this pack," she said, fuming with anger. "I know you two are sisters, but you should know that she is not just your sister but a mate to your alpha." She spoke, her voice raging with anger. "What you did was wrong, and on no account should you have done it," she tried scolding but was cut off by the irritated groan of Lord Madison. "Could you all please stop this?" he groaned while standing on his feet. "These two are sisters, and siblings do fight. You shouldn't make this a big deal," he said, and with that, he left. Everyone remained silent for a moment until I decided to speak. "It won't happen again." I apologized and held Alpha Leo's gaze, who had been quiet. "You can leave," Lady Christabel said while I lowered my head before leaving. I returned to the library and sat behind the desk while a tear dropped on my cheek, but I quickly wiped it off. With a sigh, I began typing on my system, searching for an apartment to rent within the area. As I scrolled around the internet, I kept seeing expensive ones, and with a frown, I closed the link and rested my head on the headrest of the couch, but the click from the door got my attention. Lady Christabel walked into the room and closed the door behind her before approaching me. "May I help you with anything?" I asked as I stood to my feet, but she remained silent for a moment before saying, "What I did downstairs was entirely wrong." She spoke regretfully, and I was glad Alpha Leo and Lord Madison made me realize my mistake. She said while I stared at her with confused eyebrows, wondering what she meant by Alpha Leo, helping her realize she made a mistake. "After you left, Alpha Leo told me what I did was wrong and that I should have allowed you to explain yourself." She spoke while I furrowed my eyebrows, surprised that Alpha Leo would actually say that. "I apologize for not giving you a listening ear, and I do hope you'll attend my birthday party. I would love it if you could attend." She pleaded while I nodded because I couldn't speak. She flickered her usual warm smile at me before leaving the room. As she left, Lolita kept bombarding me with questions about why Alpha Leo would defend me, but I didn't care about it. All I was worried about was getting an apartment and perhaps getting another job. I returned to my seat and indulged myself with work until I heard Maxwell's voice in my head, but I didn't give him a signal. I knew Father must have told him of the recent happenings, and I didn't want to talk about it. I finished up with work and picked up my bag when I realized it was already 7 p.m. I locked up the library, took the stairs to the living room, and handed the keys to Lady Emma. I exchanged goodbyes with some workers at the mansion as I approached the gate. While walking, I felt uncomfortable, and it felt like eyes were staring behind me. Out of curiosity, I turned and saw Lord Madison standing on the balcony with a glass of wine in his hand. We met each other's gaze, but he frowned and looked away. "Let's go," Lolita urged me, and I heeded her words. I left the mansion but decided not to go home yet because I knew they might be having dinner at home and I wanted to avoid seeing them, especially my mother. After many thoughts, I decided to go to a coffee shop and kill time. A coffee shop was just a few blocks away, so I strolled and arrived at the door. I entered and took a seat beside the glass window. My coffee was placed before me, and I took a sip of it and stared outside the glass window, staring at the beauty of nightfall. I finished the cup of coffee and ordered 3 more cups until I decided it was over. With a tired sigh, I stood to my feet and made my way to the exit door, but the ringing of my phone in my bag got my attention, and just when I was about to go for it, I bumped into someone and instantly apologized before lifting my head to see who I had mistakenly bumped into and realized it was a familiar man. "Nora," he greeted while I furrowed my eyebrows, wondering where I must have met him, and after much thinking, I recalled seeing him several times with Vera. Most times, he picks her up from home. "Hi." I greeted him awkwardly. This was actually the first time we talked. "Do you remember me? I'm Vera's boyfriend." He introduced himself while bringing forth his hand for a handshake. If only he knew how many men call themselves her boyfriend. Lolita scoffed while I ignored her words and took his hand for a handshake. "Of course, I remember you," I responded, taking my hand away. "Were you about to leave?" he asked, and I nodded. I noticed he hesitated for a moment before saying, "Can I have a word with you? It won't take much of your time, and I promise to take you back home." He pleaded while I remained silent, contemplating if I should accept his request, and after much thinking, I decided to hear what he had to say, not like I had anything or anyone waiting for me at home. "Fine, let's sit over there," I said, pointing at my table. "Thanks." He spoke in a grateful tone and followed me to the table. We sat across from each other while he ordered black coffee. "Thanks for staying," he said, and I nodded, waiting for him to say whatever he had to say, but he remained silent for a moment before asking, "Is Vera seeing someone?" "Someone? There are a dozen of them." Lolita scoffed while I ignored her and said, "Why would you think she is seeing someone else?" I asked and saw him remain silent for a moment before speaking. "She no longer picks up my call or replies to my chats and messages." He murmured while I stared at him pitifully. He seemed like a good man, and I didn't know what to say to him. "Do you know who she might be seeing?" he asked worriedly. "I don't think she is seeing anyone." I lied. Vera was seeing numerous guys. Our final exams are approaching, so I believe she is trying to work hard for it. I defended her while Lolita howled disapprovingly in my head. "You think so?" he asked, wanting to believe me. "Yes." I lied. He remained silent as he sipped his coffee and finished it. "Thanks for staying." He thanked me as we both stood to our feet. "Let me take you home," he offered as we left the coffee shop, but I shook my head and said, "I'm not going home." I lied and saw him raise his eyebrows, waiting for me to tell him where I was heading, but I didn't have anywhere in mind. "You don't want to go home?" he asked, and I found myself nodding. "Come with me then, I have somewhere to show you," he requested, but I remained quiet, contemplating whether I should go with him or not. I don't know anything about him besides that he is one of Vera's love partners. "I won't hurt you," he said when he noticed my silence. "I just wanted to show you a place, but you can decide to just take a cab and go home. I'll call one for you," he offered while I took a deep breath and nodded. I have taken risks throughout my life, and taking one wouldn't be a big deal. "I'll go with you." Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.